All right, so yesterday, a CBS YouGov poll came out at the same time that the NBC poll came out. And I did a video already on the NBC poll, but I want to delve into this one because it does show Kamala Harris up by 4%, 52 to 48. However, there is one question that I do want to ask, and that is regarding the moderate vote. So it seems as in this poll and other polls, possibly that the number of supporters who are moderate for Donald Trump is just going down. Kamala Harris is going up. You're starting to see that moderate gap widen. And I truly don't see how Donald Trump could win if he at least doesn't have that moderate number somewhat close. So we're going to delve into the poll. And I want you to keep that in mind because that's what the crosstabs we're going to be looking at kind of focus on today. Because if he loses moderate votes by 15%, I mean, I think that's game, set, match. I think it's over. I don't think he wins the election. And a number of states could just swing over to the Democratic side. So let's go ahead and look at the horse race polls that we have here, starting with all voters. So you see here, we have all voters. Now it says with leaners. So they did not give us any data of people saying that they weren't sure or undecided or refused or whatever. They just put everyone, all the leaners in there, and that's the only data they gave us, unfortunately. So we can see the poll was done September 18th to the 20th with 3,129 registered voters. Now remember, polls that are of likely voters are usually going to give Kamala Harris a little bit of a bump. So this being registered voters actually is going to be maybe a little bit more favorable toward Trump. We can see in this the margin of error is plus or minus 2.2%. But the most important thing here is online poll. So I mentioned this because Morning Consult does the same thing. You have these online polls, these web panels that might not be the most accurate because the people that they're questioning, first of all, they're not doing interviews. That already is something that you have to put into consideration regarding the accuracy. But the second thing is that those who do these online polls are usually more affluent. They're sometimes a little bit more democratic and have college degrees. So the data can kind of skew in the Democratic direction. This is the reason why we probably saw the Texas poll for the Senate with Allred and Cruz tie, because that poll skews Democratic, and this one might as well, just by the methods they're using. So I'm not saying that that's a big thing. It could be, but there's that caveat, and you should know about it. Now, if we look at male voters, we see Donald Trump is only up 52 to 48. And this might go into the skewing that I was telling you about, that this is maybe a little bit more of a Democratic poll. But still, there are the numbers. If we look at female voters, we see Kamala Harris up 55 to 44. This is about the number that we expect her to have nationwide, whereas maybe the male number is a little bit closer. However, in other polls, even ones that we have seen that are done with interviews, we have seen that number close amongst male voters. Now, if we go ahead and break it down by age, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Now, Kamala Harris has been increasing her numbers with 18 to 29-year-olds. As you can see here, she's up with that group 64 to 36. But what's most important here, I think, with these age groups are the 30 to 44-year-olds, and seeing how big that gap is, a 17% gap, 58 to 41. It does seem like this group is starting to get much, much wider as well with support for Kamala Harris. And it's not just this poll. We've seen that in a number of polls as well. The 45 to 64 group, this one seems a little bit close to me. I think this should be maybe more of a Donald Trump group. Now, the 65 and older voters, I have mentioned in other videos that I have done that they have been kind of all over the place. Though over the last few days, I will say national polls and even some state polls kind of solidifying that number more toward Donald Trump. So I think we're starting to get into a situation here where we really can't say 65 and older are going more toward Trump, but I think this is really a state-by-state basis. But nationally, I think this number, though it seems a little bit big, is probably at least in the right direction. Now, if we look at those who identify with a party, we can see exactly what we would expect. 97% of Democrats support Harris, 95% of Republicans support Donald Trump. And then when it comes to independents, you just have it split 48 to 51. So this is just absolutely what we should expect with party identification. And by the way, this is self-identification of party ID, because not every state has registration by party. Now, if we look at race, this is where we might start seeing some of the biggest shifts, and we're going to get to some of the other data that we see in this poll that might indicate why these shifts are happening. Kamala Harris has a 10% gap, losing the white vote 55 to 45. That seems about like the national average. Now, if we look at black voters, 85 to 13, that seems also like the national average. However, if we look at Hispanic voters, we see 59 to 41, an 18% gap. And as I've mentioned in my videos before, there are three key groups that Democrats need to win: Hispanic voters, moderate voters, and young voters. And it seems like if we're looking at all of these polls that we've had recently, it seems like the Democrats are doing exactly that. But this Hispanic margin of 18% is huge for the Democrats, absolutely huge, and this is what they need. It does show a widening, and again, this might be a little bit more Democratic leaning, but even if, let's say, we're at a 16 or 15% gap, that is pretty significant for the Democrats. Now let's get into ideology, and this is where I think it really comes into play. Obviously, Kamala Harris is winning the liberal vote 95 to 5, and Donald Trump's winning the conservative vote 92 to 8. But look at the moderate vote. And this is what I'm kind of wondering about, is how high can that number go up for Kamala Harris? 57 to 43% is a pretty significant gap. I mean, we're talking about a 14% gap here. And if that gap stays, I don't see how Kamala Harris loses this election. To me, this indicates that it's a game, set, match. But we're coming to the point that these numbers in some polls, we've even seen some moderate numbers in the 60s. So this could be quite interesting. She is nailing the group that she needs to nail here, to moderate voters, and she is doing it quite convincingly. So I mentioned this poll or this dynamic in some of my other videos about debate watchers, how people who watch the debate are more likely to be likely voters. And since we don't have likely voters in this poll, this can be something we can look at. So this question here, it says debate watchers more likely to vote. So after watching the debate, were you then more likely to vote for one candidate or the other? Okay, so of those asked, 37% said that they were now more likely to vote for Kamala Harris than they were before the debate. For Donald Trump, you saw 28% say they were more likely to vote for him after the debate. The ones that I just don't have listed here, the rest of the percentages, they basically said it didn't change their mind. A lot of those people are usually supporters of those candidates. Now, if we break that exact same number down to moderates, you can see now the gap even gets bigger. So of those people who then were convinced more to vote for Kamala Harris, we see that 40% of those people are more likely to vote for Kamala Harris, and 23% are more likely to vote for Donald Trump. So again, we're starting to see this divergence of the data when it comes to moderates going more for Kamala Harris. And this is just another metric with a 17% gap. Now, of course, when we think of the debate, we think of the big moment, Donald Trump, the one that's replayed all the time. Donald Trump, they're eating dogs, they're eating cats, they're eating pets, right? How did that affect the voters? Particularly, how did that affect moderate voters? And if we can see here, do moderate voters approve of Trump's dog-eating claims? As you can see, 28% approve, 72% disapprove. So we can see that when moderates are being asked these questions in this poll, they're just kind of going against Trump. I mean, some stick with him, but most are going against Trump. It just seems like he's losing the people. He's losing the narrative. He's not able to stay with, they're not able to stay with him. He's not able to get them. They seem to be going over toward Kamala Harris' side. So now, if we look at political violence, YouGov went ahead and also asked, do you think political violence is more likely to happen, in this case, under a Donald Trump presidency? As you can see, 56% of moderate voters think that there's a greater chance of violence, with only 18% saying there's less of a chance. And then the rest of the number I don't have here just had different answers, basically either the same or they had no opinion. So if we look at Kamala Harris, we see that number goes down to 38%. And while 25% of less violence goes up, it's not necessarily much bigger than what we saw in the last one, but the greater violence number amongst moderates goes down significantly. So with all these numbers that we have, all these crosstabs that we just looked at in the CBS polls, and they're being replicated in other polls as well, we do have to start asking ourselves, is Donald Trump going to be able to make inroads in the moderate vote? As a matter of fact, it looks like he's absolutely slipping away with this group. He's not being able to keep up with Kamala Harris. That gap that we're seeing is becoming more and more divergent, looking like Kamala Harris is going to put her stamp on this group. If this number is correct, and you're talking about 57% of moderates, though you're keeping your base as well of liberals, if you're talking about 57% of moderates all of a sudden voting for Kamala Harris, I think the numbers are bigger than what we see here, to 52 to 48. I think they can be much, much bigger. It definitely will have Kamala Harris in a majority. So watch these numbers over time, these moderate numbers, because Donald Trump, that debate performance and what's happened since the debate, he is losing favor more and more and more with moderate voters. And that could be the death knell of the Trump campaign. We'll see. We'll see what polls come out from this point on. And hopefully we'll get some more raw numbers coming in soon. We have just a few from Pennsylvania. If you didn't see my Pennsylvania video, go ahead and watch that. So thank you all very much for joining me. I hope you had a wonderful time. I will be doing more videos tomorrow. Hopefully the Virginia one that I promised earlier today, I will do tomorrow. They haven't updated their data, but again, looks good for Democrats. I will see you all later. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are. Bye-bye.